growing anger in Israel over the delayed return of the remains of hostages still being held by Hamas, an issue which could threaten the fragile ceasefire just days after it began. Now, as of this morning, only 8 of the 28 deceased hostages who are in Gaza have been returned to Israel. And the Israeli military says one of those 8 bodies is not an Israeli hostage. Under the terms of the ceasefire, Hamas had agreed to turn over the remains of all 28 by midnight on Monday. Now, in retaliation, Israel is restricting aid to Gaza. Families of those hostages are also demanding more action from the Israeli government, who they accuse of moving on now that the deal for the living hostages is done.
It was like the game is over. Like, now let's celebrate, the party's done, let's move on to the next thing. And we were like saying, no, that's not the case. My son is no less of a hostage than those that came out yesterday. Yes, we're very happy for those families that are being able to hug their loved ones. But my son is entitled just as much to come out and for my family to have the closure that it expects to receive.
CNN's Selma Abdelaziz joins me now. And Selma, there's always been a question about whether or not Hamas would be able to track down the remains of all of these hostages. Can you talk about what the concerns are now?
And Adi, that's absolutely the key kernel here. Let me start by explaining what we know so far, because this only just happened a couple of hours ago that the Israeli military announced that one of those 4 bodies that had been handed over overnight by Hamas to Israel was not that of a deceased hostage. Now, one source saying that they believe it was actually a misidentification by Hamas, not an intentional mistake. A second source saying that they do believe that that body is that of a Palestinian individual. Now, we did have a similar case to this in February of 2025, February of this year. Shira Bibas, a mother of 2 who had been kidnapped on October 7th, the body initially handed over as hers turned out to be the body of a Palestinian woman. A day later, her body was handed over by Hamas. So there is precedent here and hope that this can be resolved. But still, this means that so far, only 7 out of those 28 deceased hostages have been returned home. And as you mentioned, it was in the agreement that Hamas would hand over all those bodies by 72 hours, by that Monday deadline. But for months now, Prime Minister Netanyahu's own intelligence assessments have indicated that Hamas may not be able to retrieve and identify all of those 28 deceased hostages on the ground. Some may simply be held by other factions. Some may have been lost to this war. Some have been, one of the 28 is actually a lieutenant who was killed over a decade ago. So you can begin to understand the complexities. Still, there is a lot of frustration and anger on the ground, of course, particularly among Israeli families that have been seeking that closure. And their anger is not just directed at Hamas. It is also directed at Israeli politicians, some who took off their pins, indicating that the hostages are all home, something which is simply not the case. And in Gaza, the consequences are already raining down. Today, the United Nations saying that Israel, in response, has cut aid in half today. Only 300 aid trucks will be allowed into the enclave. It was 600 previously. That was barely enough, according to humanitarian workers. And Israel's security bodies are now potentially recommending that Israel redeploy its forces to parts of Gaza or shut down the Rafah crossing completely. So serious concerns now that we're seeing the cracks in this ceasefire deal. And at the heart of it all, Adi, of course, is Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has had this knowledge for months now that Hamas may not be able to retrieve all the dead.
All right, Selma Abdelaziz will be following this today. Thank you for your reporting.
Joining me right now is one of those parents still waiting, Ruby Hen, the father of Itai Hen, the youngest American hostage taken. Ruby, it's good to see you again. This all must be such a mix of relief for the other families, but also deep disappointment for your family. What are you hearing this morning?
Yeah, so if we just go to the facts, it's been 96 hours where there was supposed to come out 48 hostages, and 96 hours have passed by, and we only have 27 of those hostages out. I don't think that was the intention of the agreement that was put in place, and definitely not for the United States, that out of those 48, there were 2 U.S. citizens that have not come out yet.
The fact that one of the bodies returned has now been identified overnight by the IDF to not match any of the remaining hostages. What do you think that means. Why do you think Hamas would do that, or what do you think it says about what Hamas knows of the whereabouts of the hostages?
Yeah, I think there's lots of psychological warfare and a lot of testing the boundaries. Hamas could have done it unintentionally because it might be difficult to find, but they also might have done it intentionally to just convey the message how difficult it is. That means that they need much more time. And that is a way to play with the agreements that were put in place regarding the future of Gaza and all the discussions that are going on in phase two. It was very specific where the agreement said 72 hours Hamas needs to provide all of the hostages that it has in its possession and intelligence on those that it does not. That did not happen. So we are in a breach. We shared our concerns to the US as well as the Israeli government that the sanctions or the lack of a deadline of providing the hostages was not in place. And it was based on good faith and the desire of the parties to move forward. But now we are in a different situation, and we are very concerned that this window of opportunity of getting hostages out might close. And again, there are 2 U.S. citizens that are not accounted for, and I think the U.S., specifically the president, Mr. Witkoff, need to figure out how do we make sure that we continue getting those hostages out, including the 2 U.S. citizens.
Really quickly, President Trump is saying, he said before the Israeli parliament, the war is over. He's talking about this moving into phase 2. On Monday, the Speaker of the Israeli parliament took off his yellow ribbon pin, kind of following the return of the last living hostage as kind of a symbol of this is over. Do you think that they are now looking past your son?
Well, I hope not. It's a narrative that, of course, we are concerned about. But my son is no less of a hostage than the other 27 that came out over the last couple of days. And he is a U.S. citizen. And I hope being a U.S. citizen, that matters. I hope for other U.S. citizens listening to me now and might be traveling abroad, and God forbid, someone might take them. It should be a liability, not an asset, to take U.S. citizens out. And it's also inconceivable that Russia got all of its citizens out. Germany, France got their citizens out, but the U.S. still have 2 citizens left behind. What does that mean about being a U.S. citizen?
Ruby, what are you being told by the State Department, the White House, or even the Israeli government at this point of what to expect and what to prepare for? And what are you hearing and what's your sense? Because you have been advocating for your son from the very beginning. You and I have had so many conversations. Do you get the sense that they are as committed as they were before to returning your son to you?
I do. I have no doubt that that is the intention. I just think that the fundamentals of the agreement that were put in place are a bit vague. And that exactly is where Hamas is playing at the moment. And they're testing the boundaries. And I think that's where the United States and the mediators need to do whatever is possible to make sure that Hamas goes back to what was agreed upon and releases as soon as possible all of the hostages that they have. They are in breach at the moment. And it does also assume that the 2 U.S. citizens can be accounted for based upon the knowledge that I have. So they should have been out, and they are not out. And the question is, what do we do at this moment? And again, I am just, the father of a son. We are New Yorkers. We are simple people. I do not have all the information that the president and his team has. But I hope to have a call with folks today from the State Department and others that are part of the negotiation and get an update and understand what are the actions that are being taken to make sure that we indeed get to finish phase 1 and begin phase 2. I'm very happy that the president in his tweet yesterday said the job is not done, meaning he understands that there are more hostages that need to come out, including U.S. citizens. We just need to keep on pushing and making sure that we are able to get to the finish line of this phase in order to move on to the next phase for the benefit of the people here in Israel, but also the benefit of the Palestinian people that also want to see an end to this chapter.
Yeah. And your resolve remains, Itai, in that image just be over your shoulder. Ruby, thank you very much. It is good to see you again. Thank you for your time.